I still get a sick feeling when I think of how I hated those shoes, and to top it all off, Father bought a pair of boys' rubbers to wear over them because they would wear better than girls' rubbers. I felt so awkward and must have looked aside. I had an inferiority complex, and I think I had it the rest of my life. I never was proud of the clothes I had to wear, hand-me-downs or makeover, but I guess my parents did the best they could. I spent one winter with Rhoda and Willard in Fate and 2 winters with Stella and Martin Mountain when I was in my teens. When I look back, I don't think that was good for me. I didn't have any association with young people whatsoever. Once in a while, maybe we would go to church, living 3 miles from church and having snow roads and little children, and a lot of church to do. We just didn't go much. The last winter I was with Stella, I took a correspondence course at seminary from Uncle Ernest, who was teaching in Afton, church history, Old Testament, and New Testament. It has been of much help to me in my life. When I was in my late teens, I worked in the homes of different people, usually when a new baby was born. I gave 2 new babies their first bath and saw the miracle of birth. I helped to clean many homes and learned to be a pretty good paper hanger, which helped me when I got a home of my own. I used to work for about 50 cents a day or $5 a week. One time I walked 3 miles to a lady's house, did her washing on the scrub board one day and her ironing the next day, and mixed bread and cleaned the house for 50 cents and walked home again. And she never did pay me for the last 4 few times I went. I did it for her, and she was a slave driver too. It was when I was working for different people I came to Etna to work for my future sister-in-law, Lois Roberts, and her son Wright was born. It was while I was there I met Cyril and we started dating. Most of our dating was done going to Afton to picture shows or dances. Cyril danced when we were dating, but after we were married he wouldn't dance anymore. He just didn't enjoy it. I had dated other fellows some, but mostly went to shows and dances with Grant. He had a car and we were very good friends, and we enjoyed going places together. At first, when we were going together, Cyril was very backward and shy. People thought I had asked him, but I didn't. He asked me to marry him in the early spring of 1935 and gave me a ring in June. Then October the 30th, 1935, we were married in the Salt Lake Temple. That was quite a trip. Cyril had never been to Salt Lake before, and I had only been there a few hours while I was staying with Stella. Neither of us had been to a large city before, much less very much on our own. The reason we went to Salt Lake was because the Logan Temple was closed and the Salt Lake Temple was only open for a few days for marriages at conference time. There was something over 80 couples married that day. We went into the temple at 8 o'clock and didn't get out until 4 o'clock. We went in Cyril's father's car, and my father and mother went with us. We stopped in Logan at the cart house and got our license, and went to Tremont and stayed at Stella's and Myron's that night. Then went to Uncle Larson's that day and stayed with them. Cyril had never driven in the city before, but he did very well. As I remember, the next day was our wedding day. We two and Father and Mother went to the temple. No one else seemed to have time to go with us. We had hoped Uncle Arson and Aunt May would go. I can't say that was the happiest day of my life, because everything was so strange to us and we were such backwoodsmen. I think I spent my day worrying. After we got out of the temple, we went across to the New House Hotel and ate. Then took my parents back to Uncle Larson's. Then we went riding around for a while and got lost. We had quite a time finding our way back to Uncle Larson's. That is where we stayed that night. Uncle Arson and Aunt May gave us their bedroom. It was conference time, and we went to conference part of the time and went sightseeing some. I think we came back to Etna on a Monday, and that is where we were welcomed by Cyril's father. We made our home with him. We spent a very happy winter. The snow got real deep, and we were snowed in most of the winter. Cyril made a little sleigh and pulled it behind his saddle horse. I would ride in the sleigh, and we would go over to see my family. Even though we were only lived a few miles from my folks, I got real homesick, and Cyril would take me home. Our Norris was born in June, and then I had someone to keep me busy. When he was about 1 month old, Grandpa Roberts had a heart attack and died. In fact, he had the heart attack the night before Norris was born, and he lived for about 1 month. Norris was and still is such a joy to us. I can't remember him ever bringing us disappointment. He was a willing worker and was very young when his father needed his help so very much, and he learned to operate the tractor. Bryce, our second, was born December the 21st. Now we had two little boys to love. Bryce loved farm animals and especially horses. Before he could talk, he called them whittus. We got him a little wooden horse to ride for his first Christmas. He walked when he was 9 months old. He was and still is a very patient, quiet person. Leah Joyce, our first little darling girl, was born March the 26, 1939, and only lived about 15 minutes. A Bishop Anderson from Afton happened to be in the hospital, and he blessed her and gave her a name before she died. She was born prematurely at 6.5 months. I had trouble all during my pregnancy. Eugene was born May the 28th, 1940, the day the Nazis took France. Dr. Worthen came into my room and said another boy to go to war. But as it turned out, he was the only one that didn't serve. He just missed it some way. Eugene always had a business head and loved machinery, always imitated the sound of tractor, train, car, anything that made a noise. He was and is an adventurous. Bertus was born September the 10th, 1943. I wanted a girl so very much, but after we had him for a few hours, we loved our fourth boy and didn't think about our disappointment. He was a lovable child and always had a house full of friends with him. He adored being with his dad and still does. Verla was born January the 8th, 1945. I just couldn't believe I finally had a girl and healthy. How happy we were, a little blonde girl. All my suppressed dreams had come true. Everyone thought she would be spoiled, but not so. We have always been proud of her and her accomplishments. Kendall was born September the 25th, 1946. Such a sweet, lovable, good-natured boy, always obedient and good worker, and great pride in a job well done. He will do anything for us, and we loved having him and his family living nearby. Darrell was born July the 29th, 1949, another little boy to join us. He was a healthy baby, very lovable, and always took pride in how he looked, and was always happy over a new pair of trousers or a shirt. I remember one time I went to school to see his class perform. When he was in about the 2nd grade, and before it was his turn to get up to say his part, he combed his hair. He must look just bright. He went to school in Laramie and became a mechanic. We are proud of him. Connie was born the 12th of November, 1952, another little girl. She had dark hair. We all loved her, and she was such a thoughtful child, always interested in someone else. She went to school in Salt Lake City and became a dentist assistant. In our early married life, we lived with Cyril's father, and Cyril and his brother Everett ran the farm. In early July 1936, Grandpa Roberts died, and we continued to live in the house on the farm and still live there. Everett and Cyril got the land and about 20 milk cows. They ran the farm together for about 8 years, and Everett's boys were big enough to help. So they divided the place, and Cyril had to farm his alone until his boys could help. I helped when I could. We had a surge milker run by a gas engine to do the milking with. I milked the cows quite often. Then when we got electricity in about 1940, I've ran the milker with electric motor, which was much better. We never wanted for a necessity of life, but we didn't have a great lot either. The 1930s were hard for everyone. When we first got electricity, it was quite a new experience. The first 2 years it was very undependable. When it got cold, there would be ice jams in the canal, and Cyril was called many times to help with that. The first washing machine I had was right after we got electricity. It was the first appliance I got. We got it from Sears in Idaho Falls, and it cost us $45. We paid for it $5 a month until it was paid for. It was a real convenience after washing on the board or tromping clothes all these years. I remember Gladys bought an electric iron and let me use it a few times until I could get one. I would hurry right through my ironing to get it done so I wouldn't use too much electricity. We got an electric water pump and other conveniences as time went on. Our farm was an irrigated farm, and many hours of hard work was spent irrigating and to be able to raise a crop. As soon as the boys were big enough to help, they were required to help. Yes, and the girls did their part too. They learned to drive a tractor or ride a where they were needed. I've often said we never had much money, but farm life in Star Valley helped us to raise some good children. They learned how to handle responsibility, and I think that has helped them all their lives. When the children were young, we tried to take them on a camping trip at least once a year. That was a lot of work and preparation for me, and I even complained, but Cyril insisted. And now I'm glad we did those things together. That is the things we remember. Cyril liked to go fishing and elk hunting, and he always took the boys with him. They still like to have it along. Many times I stayed home and did the chores so Cyril and the boys could go. In the winter of 1940 and 41, we decided to get us a new car. We had been driving the car Grandpa Roberts left us. We bought a little black Studebaker from a fellow in Thane, and he took us to Salt Lake to get it. I think that was the first time we had been to Salt Lake since we were married. It was just before Christmas. We left our 3 children with Everil and Gladys while we went. We got the car late in the afternoon and went to Stella's and stayed that night. It was quite an adventure for us. We really loved that little car and had many enjoyable trips in it. It had a good heater in it, and you could go quite a ways on a tank of gas. It cost us about $700. The winter after we were married in 1935 and 36, we had a lot of snow. It covered the fence posts and most everywhere. The 1st of April, we decided to get together with Uncle Arthur and Grant and family and go up to have some Sunday dinner with Rhoda and Willard. It was conference, so there was no church. We went in a sleigh with a team of horses on the crust right over the top of the fences. We had a lovely time all together. We all took something to help out for dinner. Oh, Willard and Rhoda lived up by the East Mountains where the Star Valley Ranch now is. The next winter, Grant and Lovey lived up there, and when winter started and the snow hadn't gotten very deep yet, we decided to go out and see them one evening and spend the evening with them. We got there just fine, but it snowed while we were there, and we got about a mile and a half from their place on our way home from their place, and got stuck in the snow. We had to walk back to their place. We took turns carrying Norris and wading in snow to over our knees part of the time. We were exhausted when we got there. We spent the night with them and all slept in one bed. The next morning, Grant took his team and helped us get our car home. We worked together as a family when it was haying time, and it seemed to take everyone to get the job done. We went to church together. Cyril didn't always go. We tried to live as close to the Lord as we could and do our duty. I always felt like that was a big help to me in raising our family. I never could think of not having the gospel as part of my life. I've held many responsible positions in the ward in my life, and of all of them, I think I enjoyed teaching the 8- and 9-year-old children in Sunday school. It was the most rewarding. Many of these children I taught have gone on missions and been married in the temple. If I helped influence them for good in their lives, I feel very happy about it. My patriarchal blessing tells me I will be able to explain the gospel to both young and old in such a way that it will touch their hearts. I love the gospel. I love to be in the service of my Heavenly Father. When we were in Quartzsite in 1983, I finished writing my history, and Cyril told me his story, and I wrote it down. So I'll read that to you now. So this is Cyril's story. I was born to Charles L. and Leah T. Christensen Roberts in Kemmer, Wyoming in 1911. My father and Uncle Dave worked together buying and selling such things as butter, cheese, eggs, hay, or anything they could get. When I was about 1 year old, my folks decided to move to Star Valley. It would be a better place to raise their children, as they left Kemmer and moved to Etna. They moved their furniture and all they had with the team and wagon. The piano Verla now owns was among the furniture they moved. Dad, or Pa as we called him, bought land from Rudolph Wolfley, probably 200 acres near the East Mountains. He bought about 160 head of cattle, Herefords, and had a permit up Grays River to run them in the summer. He sold his yearlings in the fall for around 5 cents a pound. We lived in a log house that was built over a ditch. According to Everett, I fell in the ditch 2 or 3 times. Later, Pa built a nice new home there. I remember very little about living at this place. I remember Sister Stone was our neighbor, and we would go over there, and she would give us all a handful of dried service berries and tell us stories. I thought a lot of her, but was scared to death of her husband because he had such a loud voice. One day I was following Roscoe mowing, and Mr. Stone was afraid I would get in front of the cutter at bar, and he yelled at me. I lost no time in getting home. The snow got so deep I can remember in the winter there was no fence post sticking out. I remember the first car we had. I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. It was a Sears one-cylinder engine that sat back at the seat and was built like a one-seated blacktop buggy. It wasn't at all dependable. It would go pretty good downhill, but when we tried to go back home uphill a little, we would have to start it several times by cranking it. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, Pa sold that place and bought 60 acres on the river and 80 acres that Kendall now owns. He kept his cattle and Grays River permit. He gave $1,100 for the new place. He bought it from Robert Weber. $11,000, I'm sorry. Our new house that had only been built a few years was full of bedbugs. Cleo fought bedbugs day and night. One night she came home from a dance and turned the covers down on Spessa and saw a mole on her back and thought it was a bug, and about raised Spessa out of bed. She was very faithful about fighting bugs and finally got rid of them. Uncle Dave baptized me in the slough below Craig Wolfley's house. We had a well under the kitchen with a hand pump on it and a hose that reached up into the kitchen. We would pump water and fill things for the house use and put the hose out the window and pump for the team of horses to drink. We drove the milk cows to the spring down below Craig's twice a day to drink, about 15 or 20 cows. One time Cleo had just finished cleaning the house and I came in with some eggs I had gathered, and she wouldn't let me in, so I threw an egg at her and it hit the cupboard and splattered all over. I went to school in Etna, and my special friends were Lloyd and Carl Baker and Vern Wolfley and Arthur Lindsay and Roe Herrick. I had a dog called Curly that I made a pal of, and he would pull me all over on a sleigh in the winter. A couple winters I had a team of dogs that would pull me. In the summer, I ran around barefooted and pushed a tire till my dad was ashamed of me and bought me a bicycle. A stoker from Thane hauled freight, and he brought it from Montpelier in the spring when mud was a foot deep. Pa had ordered it from Montgomery Ward. I quit school before I finished the 8th grade. I wanted to quit, and my pa told me if I quit I would have to work. But I quit anyway, and from then on, Everett and I really had to work. I guess it was about the time Ma died. I quit school. Everett and Gladys were living near us. Me and a hired man ate at Gladys's and slept in our house. We didn't bother to make a fire, and many a morning our overshoes were frozen so hard we could hardly get them on. Pa was staying in Afton. The next year, Everett and Gladys moved in with Pa and I made a home for us. This lasted for 2 or 3 years, and then they moved back into their little house, and Dad and I thatched it for 2 or 3 years. I worked very hard Sundays and all. There was always wood to get from the canyon to keep 2 or 3 stoves going, or irrigating in the summer, hay or grain to be harvested, cows to be milked and fed, sheep and pigs to take care of. I never got paid or an allowance. I had the use of the car and $1 or 50 cents once in a while to go to a dance or a show. A dance was 50 cents and a show about that. I will tell about my first elk hunting experience. I had many elk hunts, but I probably learned more from my first. I was about 15 years old, and my 2 friends, Arthur Lindsay and Carl Baker, and I decided to go hunting. Pa advised against us inexperienced kids going. It was late in October. We took a team and wagon and extra horses. We left home early in the morning and got as far as Grays River Forks that night. We didn't have a timepiece of any kind, but Arthur said he could get up early in the morning to be on our way. He got us up, and we prepared our breakfast by campfire light and ate it, harnessed a team and got the horses ready to go, and waited for 4 or 5 hours for it to start getting daylight. We must have gotten up about 2 o'clock. When it got daylight, we left and went to Murphy Creek, where we planned to hunt our elk. It was too late to do any hunting that night, so we made camp and waited until the next morning. Carl and I didn't like Murphy Creek to hunt in, and thought we weren't familiar with the country. We saddled our horses up and went up White Creek, and Arthur went up Murphy. We rode until we came almost to the head of the White Creek. It was in the afternoon. We came upon about 20 head of elk grazing. We shot 3 of them. I think they were all big cows. Then we discovered all we had was 1 pocket knife with 1 rusty blade to clean them out. We struggled through cleaning them out, then left them to come back the next day to get. When we got back to camp, it was dark. Arthur hadn't gotten any, so we were safe in getting 3 elk. Arthur seemed to have the idea they could drive the wagon to where the elk was, but of course that was quite impossible. We took it up to White Creek and took all of the horses, but Arthur's up to bring the elk down. We put the horses in the wagon. We put the harnesses in the wagon box, and Arthur tied his horse to the wagon. We tried to drag the elk down, but couldn't, so we loaded them on the horses. We must have had an axe with us this day. It snowed on us all day, and when we got back to the wagon, the horse there had tipped the wagon box over and strung harnesses all over in a foot of snow. It was way after dark. By the time we got things gathered up and back to Murphy Creek, and the tent with our beds and supplies in it, it was getting toward morning. We went to bed for a while. We were wet to the hides, but we undressed and crawled in bed. We went home the next day, as I remember. The gun I used was my dad's 30-40 lever action. My license cost me $5, and it included an elk, deer, bear, and season's fishing. I have had many experiences up Grace River, some I wouldn't want to live over again. My pa ran cattle up there, and then when Everett and I got the permit to run cattle, we had them up there for several years, and we had to take them up in the spring and take the bulls up in July, then go in the roundup in October. Rounding up the cattle wasn't a bad job if it was done early in the fall when the weather was good. In the early days we stayed in tents and hobbled our horses so they could feed without straying too far from camp. We always enjoyed our Dutch oven dinners Rollo Neal fixed for us. They were satisfying after a long day in the saddle. He prepared the Dutch oven dinners and put it in the cooking hole at night for the next day, dinner to be eaten when we got back from camp. Rollo would say to me, "After supper you get the wood and I will dig the hole, and we will get a mulligan fixed for dinner tomorrow." He would put in Dutch oven meat, potatoes, carrots, and onions, and it always came out well done and hot, just ready to eat. It was good. One time we left the cattle up there too late, and it had snowed and they were hard to get. One day after we had been riding in snow all day, as deep as the horses could go in, we came to camp to find some cattle had gotten into our tents and messed all over and tore the tents. We tried to fix them up but the best we could and find a clean place for our beds. Then we went crowded in bed. Dad was to send me up Grays River. Dad used to send me up Grays River at the mouth of the canyon to pick up stray cattle. All that lived in the south end of the valley, or the river at that time, was Joe Gillis, who had a family, and Lil Reese. Joe Hoffman lived south of the road a little farther. He used to come out and help me gather up the cattle, then invite me into a meal with him. All of the old-timers along the road would come out and visit Mr. Seidenstricker, Mr. Ed Lever. We had cattle up Grace River until after Bryce came home from his mission. He helped round up right after he got home. Then we sold the cattle and permit. We got from 8 to 15 cents a pound for the steers when we sold them in the fall. The last few years we hauled them by truck to the Idaho Falls auction. One year I drove them from home to Montpelier over the old Crow Creek Road. Alvin Robinson had bought them, but we had to take them to the railroad. The rest of my history joins in with the family history. This 1983 winter we have spent in Quartzsite, Arizona, while here I have finished writing this history and recording it on tape. We had been here only a short time, about 1 week, when my brother Arthur died. We didn't think we could go home to the funeral, but Eugene made arrangements for us to go home. We flew from Phoenix, went on a bus to Phoenix, and then from there to Salt Lake, where Eugene met us and took us to Star Valley. The funeral was on a Friday, and we left Star Valley to go back to Utah Sunday. Then Tuesday, Eugene flew back to Phoenix with us and got a car from his business and took us back to Quartzsite. I think some of the other kids helped pay for the ticket. Everyone was so very good to us, and we loved them for it. That is the first time we had rode on a bus or on a big airplane. While we have been in Quartzsite, our friends and neighbors in the trailer cart had taken us to Yuma, San Luis, Mexico, and Alcon, Mexico. Then they took us to Mexicali. Cyril saw a doctor in Mexicali and he got some pills for his arthritis. They helped the pain in his shoulder a great lot. We left Quartzsite Monday, March the 7th and went to Baus where Davises were. Then we went to St. George and Tokerville the next day. We stayed along the way one night. We stayed in St. George part of the and in Tokerville at Wilford's and Affett and Hobson's part of the time. Went to the temple some. Norris and George came to Tokerville to spend a few days with us. We left to go to Utah Friday, March the 22nd. We saw the show Behold the Lamb of God while there. I stayed with Rhoda while conference was on, while Renee went to see her family. We left Connie's April 7th and went to Daryl's and stayed the night there and then went home. We felt like we had a wonderful winter and are so very thankful to our family for all their help and support. Now this is August 11th, 1983. Cyril is in Alaska with Eugene. It has been his desire to go to Alaska all his life, and Eugene has made it possible. They are spending about 6 days there. August the 18th, 1983. Cyril had a slight stroke. He had a pacemaker put in August the 23rd. A few days later, he had more strokes. The first stroke was in his eye. The next was in his ears. He was almost deaf, but after a few days, he got his hearing and sight back. Was very unbalanced for a long time. It is now December 1980.